This is Kelly Hall, President and CEO of the Longview Chamber of Commerce. It is 10 a.m., so we're going to get this morning started. Let's begin the morning by saying thank you to our coffee conversation presenting sponsor, Hilton Garden Inn of Longview, Texas. And then, of course, we have our advocacy sponsors, which allows us to bring you programming throughout the year, and that is AEP, Southwestern Electric Power Company, Austin Bank, Republic Services, Spring Hill State Bank, and Starfish Ad Agency. So we want to say thank you to these sponsors for making these coffee conversations come to fruition. So this morning, I want to share with you that today's call will be recorded and it will be made available at the Longview Chamber of Commerce. Hold on, please. Sorry for the interruption. Nothing more wonderful than technology. So again, this call is being recorded and will be made available online at longviewchamber.com. And for those online, you will receive an email later today from Stephanie with a link to listen to this program again. And of course, we would like for you to share the attachments and the program with other businesses throughout East Texas. Next, there are a couple of features I would like to make you aware of. Please find the chat and question icons. You can type in both of these features to the organizer. The purpose of the chat today is to make the organizer aware if there are issues with the broadcast. The question feature is for you to ask questions of the presenter throughout the presentation, and then once if I think that Chelsie has a pause moment and someone's asked a question that would be appropriate at that time, I know Chelsie likes a conversation versus just a presentation. So we'll ask those questions. Otherwise, we will ask the remainder of the questions at the conclusion of her presentation. Please remember you will be muted throughout the presentation. And it's important for me to just let you guys know how much we appreciate your willingness to participate. We know it's a painful season, and we know that a lot of people are looking for answers, and sometimes we just can't find them. So together we will walk through these uncharted waters, and we will find the answers, and if not, we'll just do the best that we can together. So today, our guest is Chelsie Kramer. She's the state of Texas organizer with the New American Economy. Chelsie and I met several years ago when she was on the team for the Texas Association of Business. So I was excited to find out she had taken on a new role with the national organization called the New American Economy. As I began to understand more about this organization, I realized they could help us be able to identify specific areas to advance policy within our trade area. They could help us strengthen our local economy by aligning policies. As a result, we contracted with the NAE to help us better understand the demographic and economic contributions of immigrants in the region, more specifically for the Longview metropolitan area. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to you, Chelsie.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for the kind introduction. And thank all of you for having me today. It's absolutely a pleasure to be with you, even though it is remote. As some brief background on myself, like Kelly mentioned, I was with the Texas Association of Business for 4 years, but we still work really, really closely with them, especially on immigration issues. They're a great statewide partner. And then prior to the Texas Association of Business, I worked with a Republican state senator for 4 years in 2 legislative sessions. So in addition to immigration stuff, I can also be a great resource about what's going on at the Capitol or how that crazy session works, which I think we all need to buckle up and get ready for this next one, that's for sure. But let's just jump right in. Again, like Kelly mentioned, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them the best I can. I will say I'm not a researcher, so for some of the really technical stuff, I may not know the answer, but I definitely know folks that do. So our research team is always happy to jump on a phone or jump on a chat or send you over an email for any really technical questions that I'm unable to answer. All right. Well, I am currently the Texas State Organizer for New American Economy, like Kelly mentioned. We're an organization that's been around for about a decade now. We're a national bipartisan research and advocacy organization fighting for smart immigration policies that help grow our economy and, most importantly, really focus on creating jobs for all Americans. We're a very, very data-driven organization, and one of the main ways we advocate for smart policies is what we're doing right here today, which is releasing new original research on how immigrants are affecting economies and helping communities understand the myriad of ways immigrants are contributing to their local economy. That brings us here, which is the Longview Chamber joined our chamber network, which includes chambers from across the country who see immigrant integration as an economic growth strategy. Through this network, we offer research, technical assistance, and strategic advice to chambers on issues on immigration, integration, economic development, and then members also have access to tailored economic reports, which is what we're going to be highlighting today. So usually those reports look at metro data, congressional district data, or state level data. The Longview report, which I believe you have in your handout attachments and will also be available online, includes separate data for all the Longview metro area and also Gregg County. But for the sake of time today, our presentation is just going to mainly focus on highlighting the Longview metro data. But at the ending of that report, those last couple pages, do look at the broader Gregg County area. So if you have any questions about that, we can talk about Gregg County offline. So here is a quick look at the diverse communities we work with across the country. As you can see, there's quite a few in Texas. We've done a lot of work in Texas, and it should be no surprise to anyone that with such a long border with Mexico, that of course a lot of our Texas cities are really interested in immigration and really want to make sure that they have a seat at the table in DC when it comes to any kind of policy affecting immigration, whether that's a border wall or whether that's more visas or less visas or whatever it might be. Texas obviously wants to make sure that their voice is being heard the loudest, and as a native Texan, I completely agree with that. So let's just jump right into it. Before we do, though, I would like to preface with explaining that when we are talking about immigrants in this report or throughout this presentation, I'm talking about anyone that's born outside the United States. So these stats that we're talking about within the Longview report are going to include visa holders and green card holders, your dreamers, your TPS and refugees, and even undocumented immigrants. So really think about this number holistically when we're talking about immigrants. It's just literally every single person in the Longview metro area or Gregg County that was born outside the United States. And also, the data we use and make these reports comes from primarily government data sources. So think of sources like the U.S. Census Office, the American Communities Survey, the U.S. Congressional Budget Office, and you'll also notice that most of this data is referring to 5-year data samples from 2012 and 2017, which seems a little dated, but that's actually the most recent government data that is available, especially at the time when we were making this report. There is a few 2018 numbers out right now that just came out about a month or two ago, but we don't have local data at the 2018 numbers yet. So why is talking about immigrants in the workforce important? I really think that this graph is a really great visual. It's no secret that native-born Americans are having less children. And as some of our larger generations are beginning to age and retire, we will undoubtedly have workforce shortages across the spectrum. And that's where immigrants come in as a really important economic growth strategy. So let me pose a kind of a rhetoric question. Between 1970 and 2013, how many major US cities do you believe grew without immigrants? No shock there to me, but for many, this is really interesting. It's 0. Immigrants are playing really important roles in cities across the country, which is why it's important to first understand their contributions so that together we can all have really informed conversations when it comes to talking about such a complicated issue like immigration, or even when we start to dive into deeper things like how we're going to fix what we all believe is a broken immigration system. So, over a quarter of the overall population growth in Longview in recent years came from immigrants. And when I saw that number, I was absolutely shocked because that's a huge number, especially for a region of Texas that people just don't automatically assume has a lot of immigration to it. And so as you can see here, immigrants' share of the total population is below the Texas and national average, but to me that just shows for Longview there is a lot of space for growth there. So it's below the average, but still doing really well. A common misconception, and I hear this it was on a daily basis, and now with the pandemic, I would say almost a weekly or monthly basis, is that immigrants take more than they give. But in fact, immigrants are huge contributors, even when looking at the different types of cities across the country. And so this graph here shows lots of culturally different and geographically different cities. And Longview is there at the end. So while immigrants only make up about 8% of the population in Longview, they are 11% of the workforce. And I'll also highlight a number that's at the top of their report, which is in 2017, immigrants contributed nearly $921 million to the Longview GDP, which is 9% of the GDP. And so these numbers just show that the immigrants in y'all's region really are punching above their weight, which is a great thing. It's also common for just the average American to believe that immigrants don't pay taxes. And I'm not really sure where this talking point came from or how it originated, but here in Texas, at least, immigrants are paying billions of dollars in taxes. And so these are the Texas broad numbers. And so you'll see that even after paying state and local and federal taxes, our Texas immigrants still have well over $100 billion in spending power, and most of which is coming straight back into our local communities. And when we zoom into Longview, we see immigrants are paying millions of dollars in taxes and still have hundreds of millions of dollars in spending power after taxes. I also like to highlight that the state and local taxes amount, because it's hard to imagine where we would find, that nearly $30 million if immigrants in Longview had just disappeared one day. I mean, that would be a huge hole. And so we always really like to focus in on what does that local impact look like? And state and local taxes are a huge part of what helps cities grow and make sure that they're providing the resources to their citizens. So when we zoom into Longview, we see that immigrants are paying millions in taxes, and they still have all those extra dollars, but a lot of folks wonder where are those extra dollars going? And so that's where we really like to look at home ownership, because it's a great economic indicator, but it also shows that immigrants are settling down in your region and they're creating permanent homes to raise their families. Longview is no different from the rest of Texas, in that Longview home ownership was actually higher for immigrants than native-born Americans. Now, this isn't the same for all the large cities. This is pretty unique to some of our smaller communities across Texas, but it is extremely interesting that immigrants are more likely to own a home in your region than our native-born. But home ownership is a great indicator, and so I'm glad to see that a lot of your immigrants are creating permanent homes for their families. So switching gears and starting to move to workforce. And let me know if I'm moving too quickly for anyone. I know it's a lot to digest all at once, but this slide alludes back to one of the earlier slides about an aging American population. Here in Longview, immigrants are much, much more likely to be of working age, which I think all of you at the chamber would know that is extremely important to a vibrant workforce. So it definitely appears that there in the Longview area that a lot of your current workforce is beginning to get to retirement age, and so it's really important to be able to fill those jobs and attract talent from all sources, and immigrants being part of that. Drilling down even further, we found that a majority of the immigrants that are living in Longview are active in the labor force and helping to create and preserve vital manufacturing jobs. And so we always like to look and see that, well over 90% of those that are in the labor force are employed, which is absolutely great. And that's where a lot of your tax and income is coming from. And of course, with the local manufacturing jobs, that's a really big number as well. Immigrants in the area are also filling really important workforce gaps in construction and agriculture. Both of these industries are really important for continued growth, but also from an aspect of these are typically jobs that native-born Americans just usually won't fill for whatever reason. These are positions that are really tough to fill, and yet we immigrants are willing to come here and do some of this really hard and backbreaking work that there is a lot of skill to as well. And so we're happy to see that immigrants are filling these gaps, and we'll probably continue to do so even in times when we're in kind of a state like we are now with the pandemic crisis, where unemployment numbers are vastly different than they were a few months ago. But construction and agriculture tend to be jobs that still immigrants are going to be filling. Immigrants are also coming to Longview and creating businesses and jobs. And so I love to really highlight entrepreneurship because immigrant entrepreneurs in Longview alone generate over 11% of the total business income from the metro. And think back again, that immigrants are only about 8% of the population there in Longview, and yet they're generating over 11% of the total business income from the metro. If we actually zoom out to the country and just think about our larger companies, like our Fortune 500 companies, I'll also note that nearly 45% of all Fortune 500 companies are founded either by immigrants or their children. And I know this isn't exactly in the exact region, but if we look at the North Texas region, 7 of the 22 Fortune 500 companies that are housed there were also founded by immigrants or their children. So think of really large companies like AT&T and Tenet Healthcare. And I always like to point this out because another, I would say, big misconception is that when we're thinking about immigrants, we're thinking about just those people that are working in construction or the lower skilled type of labor. But immigrants are also really important for some of our very high skilled and tech and healthcare fields as well. And they're huge contributors there. I just cannot get over the fact that they're 11% of the total business income from the metro area. That's a huge number that you all should be really proud of. And back to that misconception that immigrants are mainly low skilled. I brought in this slide here because I think it's relevant to the times we're in now. But many of our immigrants are filling huge gaps in fields like healthcare. In 2017, which is where these numbers are from, and here in Texas, for every person that was applying for a healthcare job, there were 10 open positions. And here in Longview, immigrants actually make up 5% of those in healthcare practice. So we have a lot of healthcare physicians and practitioners that are immigrants. I know I'm based here in the Houston area, which has a lot of medical tourism with the Texas Medical Center. And a huge portion of the folks that are working in the Texas Medical Center or being educated there are immigrants. And so we can't just think about immigrants as being low skilled, but they're also great contributors at some of our high skilled tech fields as well. And this brings me to kind of what's going on right now, which is with the COVID-19 crisis. And first, I'll highlight that website there at the top of the slide, which is newamericaneconomy.org. That website will give you some basic information on our organization and a lot of different kinds of research and reports that are available online, including this report. But right now, kind of our main focus over the last 6 to 8 weeks has been creating new research about how immigrants are being affected and how they're also on the front lines of this pandemic crisis. And so if you go to newamericaneconomy.org, one of the first things you'll see is our immigration and COVID-19 portal. So if that's something you're really interested in, definitely take a look at that, and I'm happy to answer more questions on that as well. But I will highlight, like what this slide says, that 16.5% of healthcare workers across the United States are immigrants. And then if we drill down further into Texas, 31.7% of our physicians and surgeons are immigrants, and almost 21% of our nurses are also immigrants. So like I previously mentioned, immigrants are playing a huge role in healthcare, which of course is helping Texas fight the pandemic and helping us get through this as well. Going on to more resources, I'd like to highlight the maptheimpact.org website. This is a really great resource if you're really interested in data and figuring out how immigrants are affecting your specific community. Or if you're talking to your friends or your neighbors and you hear someone ask, like, I wonder how many taxes immigrants are paying in my congressional district. Well, if you go to maptheimpact.org, you can actually find that out for your region. So we can drill it down by congressional district, by major metro, or you can look at the state of Texas wholly or the United States completely to be able to see what that impact is and help you make informed decisions when it comes to talking to your congressman or your city council member or whoever it might be that's thinking and talking about immigration. This is a great resource. And kind of also on that, if you are someone who wants to go and speak to their Texas legislator or their congressman and you want to have a handout or you want to have this information easily packaged where you can hand it off to either a staff member or a congressman, we're also happy to make those handouts for you based on either congressional districts or major metro areas. Again, if you're interested in diving into this work a little bit more, we do have a group called Texans for Economic Growth. Now, this is a business coalition that launched a little bit over a year ago, and it's basically made up of business leaders, different associations, chambers, and CEOs that really see and understand that immigrants are vital to the Texas economy, and they most importantly want to make sure that whatever decisions are going to be made at the federal level are reflective of what Texas needs are. And so if you're interested in just being part of that conversation or really just keeping your finger on the pulse about what the business community is saying about immigration, or if you feel like your business interests aren't being represented well enough, or you want to make sure you just have a seat at the table, we'd love to have you. You can go to txcompact.org, find out more information, see if you agree with those tenets, and join with the group. There is absolutely no financial obligation whatsoever. It's really just for business leaders who want to talk about immigration in a really informed and fact-based way and find solutions to problems. What we find is a lot of times different groups are advocating on immigration reforms, and so you have your agriculture groups, and then you'll have your high-end tech groups and your healthcare groups. But a lot of times they haven't been talking to each other. And so we just really found that if we brought everyone together under the same umbrella, that Texas could be very impactful when it comes to actually coming up with some policies that are more reflective of our workforce needs. And we really believe that regardless of what happens in November, that 2021 is going to be the year that we're going to find and see some big pushes on some big immigration policy packages. And we have to ensure that Texas has a seat at that table and a very loud voice as well, because no matter what policies come out of DC, I think we'll feel them the most here in Texas for sure. And kind of speaking on that topic, we'll probably spend a little more time talking about DACA and what that means in a future session. But right now, the Supreme Court every Thursday are releasing decisions, and DACA is one of those decisions that we are anxiously waiting on. I won't go into too much detail here today, but just know that it is something that chambers across the country have been calling on for a permanent legislative solution for our DACA recipients. Texas has the second most DACA recipients in the country, only second to Florida, and they're a big portion of our workforce here in the state. And most DACA individuals now, they've graduated college, they have families and homes, and so we want to make sure that they continue to be a part of our workforce. And it's very important that we finally have a permanent solution for this. And we're happy that the Longview Chamber of Commerce has been such a great advocate on behalf of the DACA recipients in Texas, and have joined with chambers from across the Texas and across the country as well. And so we'll see what Thursday holds, but we should have a decision by June at the latest. And so we only have a couple more weeks to go to find out what the Supreme Court says, and then what our next steps should be as a business community here in Texas. And speaking about taking a deeper dive into this conversation, if you're interested in being, again, part of that discussion about what does a strong immigration system look like, especially when we're having to take hard looks at unemployment numbers and recessions and potential depressions across the country, we invite you to come back on May 26th for a talk where we'll talk more about actual solutions and what kind of resources are available for advocates, and how we can all be better advocates. And more importantly, as I work with policy leaders across the country, and also making sure I understand how you're feeling there in East Texas. And so obviously folks in Longview aren't going to agree with folks in LA about what a good immigration system looks like, but we do believe that there is going to be a lot of crossover when it comes to workforce visas and economic growth strategies that everyone can be on the same page with. And so we want to find out where those cross sections are and highlight those and make sure that they're part of any package. And so we definitely want to hear from you. Please come back on May 26th and we will dive deeper into some of these policies. But I think for now, I will hand it back over to see if we have any questions or if there's any more that I want to get into, just let me know.
Thank you, Chelsie. There's a lot of good data there, and I do think there is a lot of confusion around the word immigrant workers in Texas and Longview. How do you think we should best approach opening up those conversations and helping others understand that this is such a much broader conversation, especially as we're talking about the visas and those, like right now, we have citizens that have been approved their citizenship, but since COVID, they can't go in and experience that terrific event where a judge walks them through the process to receive their citizenship. But yes, they've gone through all the rest of the phases. I mean, there's just so many things out there right now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked. Usually one of the first things I'll say when speaking with a group, or I guess it's actually one of the last things I would say, is don't let first immigration be a taboo topic. We're always told, yeah, you're getting ready to go to a family dinner or Thanksgiving or wherever it might be, and it's, hey, don't talk about politics or religion, and immigration is always right there with it. It's something that people are a little bit afraid to talk about because it can get heated so quickly. However, that's what we're really trying to do here today with government data and resources that are available to us now, and especially when it's packaged in a way that's easy to digest. We think that's an easier way to start that conversation that might be a little tricky to navigate. And so we really want folks to start with just some of the data points that we talk about. So when someone's confused about immigration, or they think that immigrants, again, like that main misconception, or that immigrants are taking more than they're giving, we can point to some of these big numbers and say, well, actually that's not the case, or that's not the case in my area. What I've found is immigrants are huge contributors to our local economy, and they're building businesses and raising families here. So if you start, I think, from that point, that helps people kind of reach across the aisle in their personal lives, and then also just helps them get more comfortable with that conversation that they can then take to their congressman. Because at the end of the day, nothing's going to happen without Congress. And a lot of times our congressmen need some support to be brave when it comes to talking about immigration themselves, and that comes from their voters. And so they need to know that their voters are comfortable talking about immigration in a more holistic way, talking about it in a more workforce focused way. And we just need to show them that there are tools for them to be able to have that conversation with their congressional colleagues as well. So it's again, it's not easy. It's really, really difficult to have a conversation about a system that really hasn't been changed in over 30 years, and that many people believe was broken from the beginning. But there is a solution there. We just have to kind of stand together and decide, today is the day that we're doing this, and we're getting closer to that for sure.
So just last week, I had an interesting email from one of our small businesses, and this is a company that has fewer than 50 employees, and they're trying to hire an engineer from India. I don't have all the information, but he was having to hire an attorney to help navigate the H1B visa. And I thought, I always had assumed, and this is just because of not having all the information and the data, is it was only the larger companies that experience those type of issues. Can you talk a little bit about the H1B visa process?
Oh, yes. That is an absolute nightmare to go through for any company, especially our smaller companies that just don't have these huge HR resources available to them. And so that process is not an easy one. Just think about from the company's standpoint, to be able to sponsor a visa, you first have to prove that there are no native born Americans available to fill that position. And so that process alone of just ensuring that you have posted the job for an adequate amount of time, that the salary levels are appropriate for your region and for that position. This is all according to government data. And then, of course, the department goes and looks and makes sure that you've checked all those boxes and that the job has been posted for an extended period of time and that you've interviewed folks and you literally cannot find a native born American to be able to fill that position. You have to go through all that before you can even begin thinking about sponsoring a visa for someone. And then that process alone is expensive. I mean, the company has to, again, like you said, pay for an attorney to be able to go through all these documents and make sure everything is perfectly in line, because there's a lot of pressure put on companies to make sure they're doing everything perfectly and by the book, especially as we've seen in the past. There have been some large companies that have somewhat taken advantage of the system and maybe haven't been the best actors. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting jobs for everyone. And that's, of course, for Native born Americans and immigrants alike. And to do so, unfortunately, there's a lot of red tape involved right now with that visa process. So it's not an easy one. It's expensive, and especially for smaller companies. But sometimes that's the only way that you can find a skilled person to come in and fill that job. And it's also important to note with that a big misconception or a big myth is that companies are hiring immigrants, through the visa process because it's cheaper. They can pay them a lot less, and that's not the case. They're actually required to meet a certain wage that is what the United States government considers competitive for that very specific position. And so it's an arduous process to go through, and I really sympathize for anyone who has to get involved in it, because it's not easy, whether you're the company or you are the immigrant who has to make sure that that visa is renewed and everything is to the book as well, because it's a terrible thing that you get over here for a job and you're thriving in it and you're starting to build a family, and then you can't get that visa renewed. And so it's difficult for all parties, and that is a system that we really, really need to focus on streamlining and making easier for everyone involved. And that's a big part of what our business coalition is trying to focus on right now, is going to be visas, whether that's your H1B visas for your higher skilled work, or creating a visa for lower skilled work as well. So I'm not an immigration attorney, so I can't get into the big details around what those forms look like and what that means in a more detailed way. But based on the different seminars and the businesses I've spoken to, it's a very difficult process.
Well, another, challenging conversation, and this came up last year and you helped us with this, has to do around healthcare. So in the state of Texas and in Longview, we have a number of residents that are doctors going through residency right here in Longview, Texas, that are immigrants. And then in Texas, we only get a total, just like every other state, of 30 J1 visas. And yet our state is educating immigrants. Families are here. How does that look moving forward on creating equity with the J1 visas?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And to kind of put that in lay terms for folks that might be listening and may not be very familiar with that process. So I mentioned during the presentation that, the Texas Medical Center here in Houston it's world famous when it comes to educating doctors and physicians. And Texas is blessed with institutions across the state, like there in Longview, that are great education hospitals for future doctors and nurses and practitioners at every level. However, the folks get here on a visa to be able to be educated, but there just aren't available to house them here, which is absolutely insane, because if we go back to that slide where it showed that for every job, healthcare job, there's 10 open. So for every single person that's applying, there's 10 open in Texas. It seems obvious that we need to make sure there are more visas available for the folks that we're educating here in Texas, for these contributors, these highly educated, motivated folks that we want to stay in Texas. Sometimes there just aren't visas available to them. So we end up educating them here or there in Longview. They spend a very large portion of their life there in Longview, and then they have to either return to their country or other countries like Canada are there to welcome them with open arms. And that is a symptom of a broken immigration system completely. What we're seeing now, though, is especially with COVID-19, a lot of folks are realizing this right now, that there have been unused healthcare visas across the country for different reasons, and those need to be reevaluated. And just the visa system in general needs to be reevaluated, as we've seen a shortage of certain kinds of doctors and physicians and nurses available to us. I think you're going to see, after the COVID-19 crisis kind of simmers down a little bit, hospitals and doctors really working together to advocate on this a little bit more loudly, to ensure that that there are visas and there are pathways to keep these doctors in our communities, especially more rural communities outside these large cities.
Definitely, definitely. Well, Chelsie, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to leave us with before we close out our conversation, our coffee conversation?
I think the last thing I would say is, take another look at that report and share it with your friends and family. I think every time someone looks at it, they're going to be shocked to see some of these numbers. So just share it around, see where these conversations get you. And if you want to get more involved or know someone that does, reach out to either anyone there at the chamber, reach out to myself, but there's always folks that are here to help you navigate these trying times and these really, really tricky topics as well.
Well, on behalf of the Longview Chamber, we appreciate you taking time with us this morning and just having the conversation, unpacking the data, helping us understand this is an important conversation that we need to continue to push forward. And as we close, I want to thank the Hilton Garden Inn, Longview, Texas, for being our coffee conversation presenting sponsor. I'd like to thank SWEPCO, AEP, Southwestern Electric Power Company, for being our advocacy presenting sponsor, and our gold sponsors, Austin Bank, Republic Services, Spring Hill State Bank, and Starfish Ad Agency. As a reminder, you have 2 handouts that you can download. It's in the handout section. We have the case study and then the Longview immigration brief that you can download. We are having continued conversations with Chelsie as we move forward, and I do hope you mark your calendar for May the 26th to be a part of a larger policy conversation. Again, on behalf of the Longview Chamber of Commerce, we appreciate your participation. Have a great day. Thank you.